Because I think that's quite huge when it comes to, for instance, stability and partnerships. So, you know, you may not receive funding from an organization, but an organization might provide you with support through rent, you know, or through just giving you a wonderful space.
That's correct.
And it adds to the stability because you don't have to keep thinking about what you will do if you didn't have that support, or, you know, fax machines or utilities or hydro, things like that. And I don't know where you would put all that information.
It's some of it. So that's actually a really tricky topic because some people actually value that, and like they will actually write receipts for in-kind support and stuff like that. So there's lines if you actually specifically value it on your tax form, and but most people don't bother, and a lot of people don't really expect that. So we did do a study in 2003 that examined that topic in much more depth. And in-kind support, if you're actually, I mean, we ask people to value it in ways that you wouldn't ask people to value it on their tax forms. And in-kind support was pretty substantial, for sure. It still does not come anywhere near, you know, government gifts. But I mean, in terms of, I mean, usually those organizations that get it and get a lot of it tend to be smaller, so it becomes a very, very essential part of their operations. So for small organizations, particularly those with like less than 50,000, less than 100,000 revenue, this sort of thing is massive and really, really high importance. I mean, when we did look at it systematically, it was about 20% of revenues could be technically assigned to in-kind contributions for these small organizations. They typically only make up a couple percent of overall revenue, so for the really big organizations, this in-kind support tends to be a relatively small part of the picture. But I mean, for those who get it, it's usually really important.
So if you sell the in-kind, so if you get donations and you sell them, then would that be under, I guess, gifts and donations, or would that be under other?
That would be under gifts and donations because if you're going to sell it, typically you do get it valued and you receive it for whoever you gives you.
And then you actually have to pay the tax. Some organizations might ask you to pay the tax for it too. So there's a GST portion of it?
It depends, right? The auditor, I know that our auditors are always very concerned about what is and isn't being received in kind. It is an issue.
It's, yeah.
CRA has very strict rules.
Yeah, the CRA requires that you, I mean, the CRA is not required that you pay tax on it. The donor might have specific rules that requires it, but the CRA has very, very specific rules about in-kind contributions, which you really, really have to follow, or they will not be happy with you. But beyond that, I mean, as long as you meet those requirements, the CRA is happy. Based on how you're registered, like every province has different rules guiding incorporated nonprofits. So every province has different rules and how that would be dealt with as well. So.
And it's also the individual organization. We get media space donated to us, and if we use the media space that we use, there are a couple where we have to pay the GST on it. So
we've had that. Yes, we've had that. Yeah, we've had that happen. But we've also been told that for merchandise that it has to be a wholesale value that is attributed to it, not a retail value. Right. So there are, yeah, you have to be quite careful about how you do it. About in-kind though, you know, one of the items that came up in the interviews that we did for connecting the dots is a lot of organizations talking, yes, they're given their space, or yes, they're given other support, but they weren't given the salaries of their staff. And if they did, so they said, you know, the fact is, if we didn't get the government funding to pay our staff, or we didn't get the funding to pay the salaries, we couldn't function. The space was not sufficient, so it was necessary, but not sufficient. By itself, it wasn't going to sustain the organization, right? But it was very important to their function. I don't know if that.
I think one of the most challenging things is, you were talking about the salaries just now, Linda, is the whole fact that many people might not think they've got a diversified enough funding base, but so many of those streams, especially the foundations, only want to fund stuff. So in some ways it's not diverse because it's not diverse in what can be funded. And to me that's more frustrating. Or, as you mentioned, the amount of accountability, or even just trying to solicit to get a foundation. You know, I've had to write the same amount of information for a $5 grand grant that I did for $600,000. That's really irritating. So I think it's the diversity of what funders want or will fund is the challenge. And I think if anything, and I know this is broader than literacy, but all nonprofits face that. And I think that's something that we need to kind of somehow as a field say to funders and partners, to limit us only to capital purchases or things you can put your name on and say, we won't fund administration, we won't fund salaries, as if somehow that takes away, like there's some sort of minus of it, this implication, where in fact, as you say, if I buy 10 laptops, if there's not an instructor to help the students work on the laptops, they're going to sit, and I might as well sell them on the black market, or Kijiji, or Craigslist.
Well, in fact, that happened a number of years ago in literacy when technology first came out. There were all kinds of donations of equipment without the tech support, without the training, and there were stories about equipment sitting in boxes that people couldn't use, or as soon as it broke down, there was nothing they could do with it, so they put it aside in the cupboard. So we have lots of stories like that. We've recently, we have a project that we run that is entirely dependent, that we don't get any government funding at all for that particular project, and it's all dependent on donors and foundations. And we've had a number of them recently who said they want their money used only for materials, right? And it turns out that we have 3 donors who wanted their money used only for materials, but we don't need that much materials. We needed the amount of materials from 1 donor, and they were implacable. They only wanted it for materials. You know, we're saying, this is insane. We don't have enough money for this strand, this strand, this strand. We can't pay some of our home visitors, but we've got $30,000 for materials when we need $12,000.
And the other thing is funders say to me, well, go around and get other funders. Are you friggin' kidding me? Okay, can I just hold a party and maybe all of you can come to me? Like, sorry, I'm a little edgy right now. But that's sort of, I understand the premise of it. And on paper, it seems good. Go and, like your example of, you know, the 3 funders. This one pays for materials, this one. And that's what they're hoping is, if you can get a pile of them together, you can fund, let's say, a whole program. But the time and energy, and then to get them to time out in the same way, is, you know, unless I'm the, you know, some huge nonprofit, that's just not going to happen. And of course, one doesn't want to wait for the other one. Well, are they donating? I don't know. Are you donating? You know, what does that mean? So it's again back to this capacity to do that type of work. Should we be accountable? Yes, I think we should. But you know, there's. I think it also goes to a larger attitude that's still pervasive, which is highly irritating. Geez, I'm sounding off. You tell me to shut up soon. This attitude that somehow nonprofits are stupid and we have to kind of be caretaken with. Like, you don't really know what you're doing with your money. So, you know, when you come to us in the for-profit world, we'll help you. You know, it's this I'm not saying every donor every time, but I find there's still that kind of patriarchal attitude that nonprofits aren't sure what they're doing. And so therefore, we have to be so careful with them. So at least 2 of you are nodding your heads. So
and we had one recently, and I've got all the non-profit donations stories, but we had one recently also that told they would donate, this was one of the materials, by the way, right? They would donate $10,000 in materials for this program, but they wouldn't give us the money up front. We needed to purchase the materials and then send in the invoices. So we don't have $10,000 up front. They said, we're very fast. We have a 30-day turnaround. If you send us the invoice as soon as it's been processed, we'll have a check back to you before the payment is due. And we're trusting, right, that that's,
Oh my God.
we're trusting that that's the case. I mean, the fact is, we can sustain it for a month,
Yeah.
but I sure hope it comes in 30 days. I mean,
It's
I don't know how long-
extraordinary.
is that common practice?
Not
It's
really.
the first time it's happened to us, but it is common practice.
No,
no.
It's usually the off, like whenever,
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't been at the whole fundraising thing for very long, but I know when I did write one proposal, I mean, they sent the check. They sent the letter saying.
Yeah,
"Here's
usually
the
that's
check,"
correct.
you know, which I was really happy with. But I mean, that is a tremendous risk, right?
Well, I mean, it's a reliable funder, it's a bank, all right? They're going to pay us,
But still, what
but
if
I
there was a
assume that they
problem?
had been burned in some way,
Yeah.
that some charities have asked them for money and not
Yeah.
spent it on what they said. I don't know, I mean, I don't know why else they would do that.
I have one question about, you were talking about earned income. And one of the things that our program does is provide ESL tutoring for fee for service. And now my wonder is, as a not-for-profit, and this may sound like a crazy question, but with the HST, do you know anything about that, how that impacts? Like if we're not-for-profit, I mean, I know you're not an accountant, but have you heard anything about that? Like how is that going to impact?
Right. So with that, suffice to say it's a very complicated topic. The best advice I could give to you is the charity's Scan and Revenue Agency actually is a checklist for how to deal with HST issues.
Right.
So a lot of they changed some of the rules. Some of them are pretty similar to what they were before. They still have it's like a 40-page guidance on what stuff qualifies for having to charge HST and which doesn't. I scanned it.
But obviously these numbers, they, like the earned income, that's what it
Well, that would be what it comes under. The HST would not be included in here because it's not a revenue source. It's something that's to the government. Well,
They would get half back,
but
right?
it's a
Yeah,
revenue.
well, you said that.
That portion would be
Tax, right? That would
yeah,
count, yeah.
But the collected portion, only what you get back is actually considered revenue.
Sorry, the lady here had a question.
Just wanted to add about the setup in the front, about stuff. I mean, I've only been in literacy for 2 years. I have computers coming up my nickname. I don't need any more computers. I don't need any more stuff. And I think that mentality comes from, in the past 15, 20 years when large charity organizations would fundraise and 15% of every dollar went to charity people. But literacy is different. Literacy, I need 85% to go to the front line because they're doing the work.
That's
So this whole thing has been twisted.
That's exactly what it said.
It's been twisted and marketed at those for-profit guys. They're all afraid, and they think that they're protecting the public from those abuses when they put those kind of caveats onto the money that they give you. So that brain paradigm has to change.
There's also the whole paradigm of literacy as a charitable endeavor. So it's volunteers are doing it. What do you mean they need to be paid? Well, somebody is coordinating it, right? And somebody is doing. There are people, even if you've got volunteers, there is generally somebody who.
But even if I just add, you made a point earlier when you spoke about complying with the government funds, you become on the government. Well, the government doesn't 100% fund me, but I have to follow all their rules anyways. So why don't they just belly up to the bar and fund me? Because I'm doing their stats and answering all the questions, but they're calling all the shots.
The one thing, I mean, just to add to
So I'm preaching there.
I mean, pretty much, the fact that this money goes to compensation of actual staff is not unique to literacy. I mean, almost every single subsector of charity has at least 60% of its money going directly to staff time. I mean, it's the fact that it's not different anywhere. Everyone has this exact same problem, and no one's really, okay, I'm not going to say no one, but many organizations are not changing, despite the fact that there's clear evidence that they should. I mean,
It's not
I'm
marketing,
into.
though. Until that's changed by marketing, that it's frontline staff you're paying for. Because I've reached that conclusion now, because I have so much stuff that I now realize I have to remarket what we do and say, you know what, you're not paying for this, you're actually paying for a program to teach people. Never mind the computers.
I'm thinking about charities. Charities come in different sizes, and so you have large charities and you have small charities like us. But nevertheless, we need something like these, no kind of expertise anyway, to report on our finances.
Yeah.
So that means that I have to have a staff person. Now, I'm really lucky if I have a volunteer who will do that, but they're getting scarcer and scarcer. Because that's quite a complicated business. No matter You know, how much you're getting, how small, how big, you know, that's a complicated procedure. I would say that most coordinators of religious programs, including myself, are